This is, without a doubt, the biggest weather story of the entire summer, and it is still not over. We are talking about a heat wave so relentless that it has been parked over the central and southern United States for weeks. And instead of breaking down, it is about to get even stronger. We're talking about the potential for 110-degree heat by the end of this month. We're talking about drought that's stretching into its second month in some places. And we're talking about a wildfire threat that is quietly building underneath all of it. So before we get into the maps and the numbers, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me two things: where you're watching from and what it actually feels like outside your window at this very moment. Are you baking under one of these heat domes? Are you dodging thunderstorms? Are you one of the lucky few sitting under 70-degree relief? I read these, so let me know and let's get into it. Let's start with the headline, because it's the story driving basically everything else on the map today. A massive area of high pressure, what meteorologists call a heat dome, has been anchored over the central and southern U.S. for weeks now, and it is not budging. If anything, it's building strength. As of today, an extreme heat warning is in effect across more than 20 North Texas counties, including the Dallas-Fort Worth metro, with highs expected to hit around 106 degrees. That warning runs through this evening, but don't get too comfortable. Triple-digit heat is forecast to continue right through the weekend and into early next week, with almost zero rain chances to offer any relief. We're talking maybe a 10% chance of an isolated shower way out near the Oklahoma border, and that's about it. Head west to the Permian Basin and it's the same story on repeat. Midland is forecast to hit around 100 degrees today. Odessa right behind it at 111 under sunny skies and light southerly winds. This is bone-dry, rain-free heat day after day after day. Oklahoma is right there with Texas. The state has already logged 45 days this year above the 100-degree mark. And while some longer-range outlooks hint at a possible cooldown into more normal upper 90 territory by very late August, forecasters are cautious about leaning on that too heavily. Long-range predictions this time of year have a habit of disappointing. And it's not just the southern plains. This heat dome has effectively split in two, with one lobe anchored over the southwest and a second reaching into the southeast. And the combination has produced some genuinely historic numbers. Just in the last couple of days, Miami tied its all-time hottest day on record, hitting 100 degrees, only the second time that has ever happened in recorded history there. Charleston, South Carolina hit the century mark as well, with the heat index, how it actually feels on your skin, soaring to 112 degrees. And that kind of oppressive, humid heat has stretched from southern Georgia through coastal South Carolina, into the Florida Panhandle, and all the way up into the Memphis area, where heat indices have been pushing 105 to 110 degrees. Put simply, this isn't a normal August hot spell. This is a heat event that will likely be talked about for years. Let's break down exactly who's dealing with the worst of it right now. Texas and Oklahoma remain ground zero. We're looking at highs of 105 to 107 degrees across a huge stretch of both states today, with actual air temperatures not even factoring in humidity, flirting with the 106 to 108 range in spots like Dallas-Fort Worth. Heat index values, meaning what it actually feels like when you step outside, are running several degrees hotter than that in the more humid pockets. The desert Southwest is baking as well, with widespread 100-plus readings from Arizona into New Mexico. Though at least there, the air is drier, which takes some of the edge off compared to the mugginess further east. The Southeast, meanwhile, is dealing with the worst of both worlds, high heat and crushing humidity. Georgia, the Carolinas, and the Florida Panhandle are seeing heat index values climbing into the 105 to 110 range, and in some spots, even higher. That combination of heat and moisture is genuinely dangerous, because your body has a much harder time cooling itself off through sweat when the air is already saturated with water vapor. And then there's the broader footprint. This isn't confined to just a few states. Widespread 90 seconds are showing up much farther east than you'd normally expect this late in August. And heat advisories or warnings have been posted from Texas clear over to the Carolinas. If you're in any of these zones, you already know the drill, but it bears repeating. Limit outdoor activity during peak afternoon hours, stay hydrated well before you feel thirsty, check on elderly neighbors and relatives, and never, I mean never, leave kids or pets in a parked vehicle, even for a few minutes. Vehicle interiors can climb to dangerous levels shockingly fast in this kind of heat. Here's the part of the forecast that honestly stops me in my tracks a little bit. This heat ridge is expected to strengthen again after this weekend. Long-range guidance is hinting that by the August 24th through 27th window, we could see afternoon highs climbing into the 108 to 110 degree range across parts of the southern and central United States. To put that in perspective, that's not just hot for late August. That's approaching some of the most extreme heat this region has experienced in years. If those numbers verify, we could be looking at daily record highs falling across multiple states and potentially even some all-time August records depending on exactly where the hottest air sets up. The reason this ridge keeps rebuilding comes down to the broader pattern steering our weather this year. We're currently dealing with what's being called a very strong El Niño pattern in the Pacific. And that large-scale ocean atmosphere signal is helping to lock this kind of ridging in place over the central U.S., while pushing the storm track well to the north. Essentially, the atmosphere has found a groove, and it does not want to come out of it. Heat this persistent doesn't exist in a vacuum. It comes hand in hand with drought. And that's exactly what we're watching unfold across the plains. Because this high-pressure ridge has been so dominant, it's been acting like a lid, keeping storm systems from ever really breaking through into the central and southern plains. Some locations have now gone 30 to 40 days without any meaningful rainfall. Not just a dry stretch, a genuine deepening drought. And the concerning part is the trajectory. With the ridge expected to rebuild and strengthen through the rest of this month, there's no real relief in sight for these drought-stricken areas. Soil moisture continues dropping, reservoir and pond levels are falling in parts of Texas and Oklahoma, and agricultural impacts are mounting for row crops and cattle operations that depend on late summer moisture to carry them into fall. Unfortunately, the forecast trend suggests conditions are likely to worsen, not improve, through the remainder of the summer season. Take that extended dry stretch, combine it with weeks of intense heat, and you get a third ingredient that doesn't always make the headlines, but absolutely should. Elevated wildfire risk. Grasses and vegetation across the southern plains have been drying out for weeks now, essentially turning into fuel. When you combine that critically dry vegetation with persistent heat, low humidity, and any kind of gusty wind, which we do see periodically with this pattern, you get a setup that's ripe for fast-moving grass fires and wildfires. This is especially a concern across parts of Texas and Oklahoma, where large stretches of grassland and rural terrain sit directly in the bullseye of this heat and drought combination. If you're in a rural or grassland area in this zone, now is the time to be mindful of outdoor burning, dragging chains, parking on dry grass, or anything else that could throw a spark. Fire danger in these areas is expected to keep climbing right alongside the heat and the drought. While the South Bakes, it's a completely different weather world just a few hundred miles north, where the jet stream and storm track have been forced around the edges of that heat dome. Today into tonight, the more organized severe weather threat sits across Nebraska, South Dakota, and Minnesota, where damaging wind gusts, large hail, and even a few tornadoes can't be ruled out as storms fire along that boundary between the hot air to the south and cooler air to the north. There's a second corridor of active weather stretching from Kentucky and Tennessee into Virginia and the Carolinas, where a separate batch of storms is expected to bring locally heavy rain and gusty winds. Tuesday's storms, which are still working their way through parts of Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois, including the Chicago area. Brought another round of strong to severe thunderstorms with heavier rainfall. and some spots likely picked up a couple of inches in a short window, which always raises the risk of localized flash flooding, especially in urban areas with lots of pavement. Looking toward the weekend, there are some signs that the overall storm track may shift eastward. And that's actually good news for one specific region, the southeast. Gulf moisture is expected to stream northward, feeding into a wetter pattern across Florida, the broader southeast, the Carolinas, and Virginia. In fact, these areas could end up seeing some of the highest rainfall totals of the entire week, as this moisture interacts with the boundary between the heat dome and the cooler air to the north. For places that have been stuck under that oppressive heat and humidity, some rain, even with the risk of locally heavy downpours, will likely be a welcome change, as long as it doesn't come too fast for storm drains and low-lying areas to handle. Out in the desert southwest, the summer monsoon pattern remains active, with scattered afternoon and evening thunderstorms continuing across Arizona, New Mexico, and the Four Corners region, These storms won't put a dent in the broader heat or drought story across the plains, but they are bringing periodic downpours, gusty outflow winds, and the occasional dust storm to the desert southwest. So if you're in that region, keep an eye on rapidly changing conditions during peak afternoon and evening hours. I know it might not feel like it watching this, but there are pockets of genuinely pleasant weather out there right now. You just have to look north of the heat ridge to find them. Parts of the northern United States and the Ohio Valley are sitting on the cooler, more comfortable side of this pattern, with high temperatures in some spots only reaching the 70s. If you're in that stretch of the country, consider yourself fortunate. This week, you're essentially getting a preview of early fall while most of the country swelters. Let's zoom out to the tropics for a moment. The Atlantic Basin has actually been relatively quiet lately. And the reason comes down to strong wind shear, those disruptive upper-level winds that tend to tear apart budding tropical systems before they can get organized. So for now, that's one piece of good news amid an otherwise intense pattern. The Pacific, on the other hand, remains considerably more active. And as I mentioned earlier, a very strong El Niño continues to play a major role in shaping this entire pattern from the strength and persistence of the central U.S. Heat ridge, to the position of the jet stream, to where the storm track has been forced to set up. When El Niño is this strong, it tends to leave fingerprints on weather patterns across the entire country. And this summer is a clear example of that. So, let's bring it all together. The dominant headline story remains dangerous and increasingly persistent heat across the central and southern United States heat that has already produced record and near record numbers from Texas to Florida, and heat that is forecast to intensify even further as we approach the final week of August, with 108 to 110 degree readings possible in the hardest hit areas. That heat is feeding a worsening drought across the plains, with some areas now over a month without meaningful rain. And that drought, paired with the ongoing heat, is fueling a rising wildfire risk, particularly across the grasslands of the southern plains. Meanwhile, the northern plains, the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and the Southeast remain the more active zones for thunderstorms, heavier rainfall, and the occasional severe weather threat, a sharp contrast to the dry, scorching conditions just to their south. Bottom line, if you're anywhere from Texas through Oklahoma, into the desert southwest and across the southeast, this heat is not a short-term inconvenience. It's shaping up to be one of the more extreme and prolonged heat events of the year, and it's worth taking seriously, especially for anyone who works outdoors, anyone with young kids or older relatives, and anyone without reliable access to air conditioning. That's where we stand as of right now. Extreme heat locked in and intensifying across the central and southern U.S., a worsening drought and wildfire threat building underneath it, and an active stormy pattern for areas farther north and east. I already asked once, but I'll ask again before we wrap up. Get in that comment section and tell me where you're watching from and what the weather is actually doing outside your window right now. I want to build a real live snapshot of what's happening across the country today, and I can only do that with your help. Stay cool, stay hydrated, stay weather aware, and I'll see you back here for the next update.